kill the fear or die. Being the youngest one doesn't mean that you are the bravest. It was my first official day in the war. I was slowly walking around the apartment in the early morning. The phone rang. One of those big plastic old phones was considered sophisticated back then. A female voice told me, "Mario, pick up your equipment, pick up your weapon. The truck is coming to pick you up." I had my uniform on and thought I looked really smart. It was camouflage uniform with military boots and shiny belt. I caught my reflection in the mirror, and for a brief moment I truly believed the army was going to be like a Rambo movie. I had my MG42 machine gun and I was going to win freedom for my country in one day. How mistaken I was. I picked up my equipment and prepared to walk out the door of my home. I wished I could see my parents one more time, but there was nobody else there. The apartment was silent. I looked at the windows, checked that the oven wasn't leaking gas and that electricity was off. Then I stepped outside. I saw my neighbor preparing to leave the city with his family. Instead of respect or fear, he looked at me as if to say, "Is this guy going to draft me to the army?" I saw in his eyes he didn't want to be part of. He was older than me, in his mid-30s. I was 18. He shook my hand and "I'll see you when I see you" kind of way and said, "Mario, I don't know what to say." "Be safe with your family," I said. The big low truck with grey markings appeared in front of my building. I recognized it, and the driver from a local moving and furniture company. My unit didn't even have a military truck. The unit contained people I knew, which was great until they stepped into uniform. I knew I'd had more training than anybody else, but they were tough guys. I use it to admire. They would walk the streets and everyone would run away from them. People respect them but hate them too. I saw how few cars were in the parking lot. Normally the place would be full of cars in front of every block. It was designed this way so people could easily see into all apartments and report back to authorities. The streets were quiet, except for a few people in the coffee shop. It was quieter than it used to be. Windows were covered with sticky tape to prevent shattering from mortars, artillery, and rockets. Sandbags protected the basements, which had quickly been converted into makeshift refugees when the shelling started. Everyone in truck greeted me. I was the youngest one there. I looked at everyone's faces. Some were happy, some looked afraid, and most seemed to have had a few drinks already. I was anxious. I couldn't wait to get into combat, but I didn't know what to expect. I smelled the summer and the sun getting brighter, but those dark feelings inside me were still very dark indeed. Trucks were slowly departing to the suburbs. We drove to the city center where we were due to report at the police station. We saw a few people or cars. It was all very unusual. The police station was opposite the main train station. I saw buses full of women, children, and some men fleeing the city, a scene that was to be repeated until November. On that day, I saw the first armored train had been converted. Volunteer soldiers of the Croatian army were arriving by the handful. We all went into police station to find the backyard covered and lights turned off. It was daytime, but the corridors were still kept dark. The lack of lights made the building less visible from the air. Lights gave the enemy the opportunity to see or orientate themselves. My city was very flat, so you were able to see lights from kilometers away. People were wearing a lot of different uniforms. Some were camouflage like mine, another bluish grey, the first uniforms of the newly formed Croatian police. We were directed into the big room where officers used to play exercise and basketball or soccer. We were told we could go out to buy smokes and coffee, but we had to be back in half an hour. Of course, I went with the crowd, my band of brothers. I wanted to parade around. I wanted to show off. I wanted people to notice my uniform, looking tough and ready for the action. How naive and stupid I was. Once we returned from the coffee shop opposite the police station, we noticed that there was some unclaimed equipment on the floor that didn't seem to belong to anyone. Roll call came. It consisted more of the battle groups rather than a single unit. During the roll call, it was confirmed that unclaimed equipment on the floor belonged people who were missing. The full reality of everything hit me in that moment. This was not a Rambo movie, not a Chuck Norris one-man army. I was afraid and felt the fear coursing through my bones. A top brass ranking officer told me, "Mario, kill the fear or die." But how do you know how to kill the fear? I didn't know how much fear it is. A few weeks ago, my biggest fear had been getting poor grades at school, or how I was going to kiss the girl. Now, I had the fear of combat, dying in combat, the horror of war and destruction it causes. How do you know how to get rid of that fear? We were told we were going to drive in trucks, a couple of four-wheel drive vehicles filled with different battle groups. We were reported to the village called Ernestinovo, which had a command post for that region, similar to reporting to police station in my city. I couldn't understand why we were going to drive through villages that were likely to have people who were definitely not loyal to the Croatian government. They were not supportive of Croatian independence and democracy, and they were likely to call some of the villages with the Yugoslav People Army units, stationed together with Serbian rebels. It seemed illogical. We didn't have military trucks or armored vehicles. All we had was our hearts and souls. While I was away for coffee and smoke, I didn't hear what commanding officers been talking about. I was not a commanding officer yet, just a police officer of the special forces. I had heard the night before that there was a huge fight in Ernestinovo, and that whoever was defending that village for us had sustained heavy casualties. The attack had stopped, but the casualties were there. Our job was to replace them for 4 days until another group was going to replace us. These people needed to have a break and recuperate. We went to pick up more equipment, hand grenades and anti-tank grenades, and I was picking all the belts I could with the same 7.9mm ammunition as my MG42 machine gun. I had no way of counting the 500 bullets on each belt. I just knew I needed to replace the belt frequently due to ferocity and speed, or how many bullets the gun could spit out. It was unbelievable. I did have a colleague called Aid to help me hold ammunition belt during fighting. replenish my ammunition, and support me with other duties. He was a man in his 40s who had recently lost a member of his family to the aggression of the Serbian forces. He was vindictive and very angry man. He always told me, "You just shoot. I'll make sure that you have all bullets possible." It was pointless to say, "I don't want to go on the mission," regardless of how afraid I was. I just kept being told, "Kill the fear or die." I was the youngest one, and everybody looked at me with a smile in their eyes. I think most of them were proud of me for joining up. But being the youngest one didn't mean I was the bravest, though. We walked back toward the truck and joined 4 other vehicles, with 60 or 70 for us together. We traveled for around 2.5 hours to the village in Estinovo with command post. I heard about that village, but had never explored it. Not having a car meant that I hadn't explored the surrounding countryside outside my city. I didn't know where any of the villages actually were.